My beloved sisters and brothers, let me tell you something that will shake the dust off your weary soul. There comes a time in every woman's life when she stops walking with her head bowed low. There comes a day when she no longer shrinks to fit into spaces too small for her spirit. There comes a moment when she stands in the mirror, sees herself, not just with her eyes, but with her soul, and says, enough. Oh, yes, that is the moment the game changes. That is the moment the wind shifts, the sun rises with new brilliance, and the earth recognizes her footstep with power. Because when a woman remembers who she is no longer bound by the chains of expectation, hesitation. No longer will she be the victim of forgotten dreams, whispered doubts, or the burdens placed upon her by a world too afraid of her power. She will stand taller than the mountains, walk firmer than the rivers carved through stone, and shine brighter than the North Star guiding lost travelers home. She will be unshaken, unbothered, and utterly unapologetically herself. And my dear, when she remembers that, when she breathes it in and claims it as her birthright, the whole game, the world must adjust to her presence, because she will no longer adjust to its limits. Now, hear me clearly, this is not a moment of mere inspiration. This is a declaration, a revelation, a revolution. If you've been waiting for permission to step into your power, this is it. If you've been searching for a sign, my dear, let this be the neon light flashing in your spirit. You were never meant to be small. You were never meant to be quiet when you have the thunder of truth in your soul. The journey of remembering who you are is not an easy one, but it is the most necessary one. And when you walk it with faith in your step and fire in your heart, the whole universe will lean in to watch. Now, let us talk about what it takes to remember. Let us walk this road together. There are words that are spoken over a person's life, and then there are words that are planted. Some words roll off like water over stone, but some bury themselves deep in the soil of a soul, wrapping their roots around the mind and choking out every dream, every ounce of self-worth, every whisper of power that was placed inside her by God himself. She was told she was too much, and so she shrank. She was told she was not enough, and so she stopped trying. She was told her voice was too loud, and so she silenced it. She was told she was difficult, and so she softened her edges until she was no longer herself. My dear, the greatest battle a woman will ever fight is not against the world, but against the falsehoods planted inside her that make her forget who she is. These lies were never hers to carry, yet she bore them like shackles around her feet, stumbling under their weight, mistaking their heaviness for truth. But the day came when she could not walk another step, bound by chains that did not belong to her. The day came when she stood still, feeling the exhaustion in her bones, the ache in her spirit, and the silent scream in her heart demanding to be heard. And in that moment, she did not whisper. Oh no, she roared. She roared against the voice that caged her. She roared against the voices that told her who she was before she ever got the chance to decide. She roared against every hand that tried to mold her into something smaller, something quieter, something more acceptable. She roared, and the lies trembled. Now understand me when I tell you this. Breaking free is not gentle work. It is not soft. It is not polite. And it is certainly not easy. It is the ripping of roots, the tearing down of walls built to contain her. It is the shattering of mirrors that only reflected the versions of herself made palatable for others. It is the unlearning of everything that was never true, but was spoken so often that she believed it. And when she finally broke free, when she stood in the fullness of her truth, she saw herself for the first time, not through the eyes of the world, not through the expectations of others, but through the vision of the one who created her. And what she saw was not weak, not broken, not small. What she saw was fire. What she saw was resilience. What she saw was a woman who was never meant to be tamed. And in that moment, the game changed. There are wounds that heal and wounds that linger. Some leave only a memory, a faint whisper of pain, long gone, while others carve themselves into the skin of the soul, deep and unrelenting. These are the scars that tried to quiet her, the ones that told her she was unworthy, unloved, unwanted, the ones that whispered in the dark, "You are broken." Oh, but she learned something about scars. She learned that they were not proof of her defeat, but of her survival. She learned that they were not marks of shame, but testimonies of her resilience. And most of all, she learned that every scar carried a story, one that no longer had power over her, but one she had power over. At first, she tried to hide them. She covered them with laughter too loud, with a silence too heavy, with a perfection too exhausting to maintain. She dressed herself in masks, in disguises, in the careful art of being what the world wanted her to be. But late at night, when the world was quiet and there was no one left to perform for, the scars whispered. They whispered of the times she was betrayed. They whispered of the words that wounded deeper than knives. They whispered of the moments she thought she would not survive, and for years she let them haunt her, until one day she realized something so profound it shook her to her core. Her scars were not her enemies. They were not meant to be hidden, not meant to be sources of shame. They were her map, her history, her proof that she had walked through the fire and emerged, not unscathed, but undefeated. So she stopped hiding them. She rolled up her sleeves, lifted her head, and let the world see every place she had been broken and healed. She let them see the stretch marks of growth, the cracks where the light poured through, the battle wounds that told a story not of weakness, but of triumph. And in doing so, she set herself free. Because the moment she embraced her scars, they lost their power to shame her. The moment she embraced her scars, she stopped shrinking under the weight of old pain. The moment she embraced her scars, she realized she was still standing not in spite of them, but because of them. And oh, when she stood fully unafraid, unapologetic, the game changed. There was a time when she believed that love had to be earned, that worthiness was something given by others, like a prize handed out for good behavior. She thought if she was kind enough, quiet enough, beautiful enough, or useful enough, she would be chosen, valued, wanted. So she made herself smaller. She dimmed her light so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. She poured herself out until there was nothing left. She accepted breadcrumbs and called them a feast. And still, it was never enough. Because the truth is, when you believe your worth is something to be bargained for, you will always lose. You will always be left empty, chasing after something that was never meant to be in another's hand. But one day, she looked in the mirror and saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weariness in her soul. She saw the way she had given pieces of herself away, hoping someone would tell her she was enough. And in that moment, something shifted. She whispered to herself, soft at first, then louder, "I am worthy, not because of what I do, not because of what I give, not because of what they say. I am worthy because I am." And when she said it, something broke loose. She stopped asking for permission to exist fully. She stopped seeking validation from people who couldn't see her worth. She stopped negotiating with those who only loved her when it was convenient. Oh, they noticed. They noticed when she no longer bent herself to fit their expectations. They noticed when she stopped apologizing for taking up space. They noticed when she started walking with a confidence that came from somewhere deep, somewhere unshakable. Some tried to pull her back. Some tried to remind her of who she used to be, compliant, accommodating, afraid. But she had already seen the truth, and there was no unseeing it. Her worth was never up for debate. Her value was never dependent on their approval. Her existence was already divine, already whole, already enough. And when she claimed that truth, when she let it settle into her bones and carry her forward, the game changed. There comes a moment when a woman realizes she is carrying too much, not just in her hands, but in her spirit. She looks around and sees the weight of old relationships, dead-end conversations, expectations that were never hers to bear. She sees the dreams she outgrew, the habits that hold her back, the spaces that no longer welcome her evolution, and she knows it is time to walk away. Oh, but leaving is never easy. The heart is a loyal thing, clinging to what is familiar, even when familiar has become a cage. She wrestles with the guilt, the doubt, the fear of what will be lost. What if they say she changed? What if they call her selfish? What if she walks away and there is nothing waiting on the other side? But then a quiet truth rises from within. She was not made to live in places that drain her. She was not born to pour endlessly into hands that never reach back. She was not created to stay in circles that shrink her spirit. She was not destined to remain in rooms where her voice is an inconvenience. So she stands up, she straightens her spine, lifts her chin, and starts moving forward, not because it is easy, but because her soul is worth saving. Some people won't understand. Some will remind her of the good times, hoping nostalgia will be enough to keep her bound. But she knows better now. She knows that just because something was once good does not mean it still belongs in her life. She knows that not everyone is meant to go where she is going. She knows that peace is worth more than approval, and freedom is worth more than familiarity. So she releases it all, the friendships that drained her, the roles that confined her, the narratives that no longer fit the woman she has become. She lets go, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Because every goodbye is a step towards something greater. And when she finally walks away, when she finally claims the space she was always meant to stand in, the game changes. For too long, she made herself small. She learned early on that the world was more comfortable when she played along, when she didn't shine too brightly, when she didn't speak too boldly. She was taught to be humble, but not the kind of humility that comes from grace, the kind that comes from fear. Fear of being too much, fear of intimidating others, fear of standing so tall that someone somewhere might try to cut her down. So she learned the art of shrinking. She bit her tongue when she wanted to speak. She softened her brilliance so others wouldn't feel outshined. She said, "I'm sorry," before she even had a reason to. She questioned herself, doubted her instincts, hesitated when she should have stepped forward. And for years, she mistook this for kindness, for humility, for wisdom. But something inside her was growing restless. A voice, small at first, but persistent, whispered, "You were never meant to be small." The truth of it unsettled her. Because if she wasn't meant to be small, then why did the world reward her for it? Why did people praise her when she played it safe? Why did they call her sweet when she stayed quiet, but too much when she spoke her truth? Then one day she saw it clearly. The world had never been afraid of her weakness. It had been afraid of her power. And that was when she made the decision. She would no longer apologize for the force within her. She would no longer downplay her intelligence to make others comfortable. She would no longer dim her light just because someone else preferred the darkness. She would no longer soften her voice when she had something to say. Oh, they noticed. They noticed when she stopped moving out of the way. They noticed when she spoke with conviction instead of doubt. They noticed when she walked into a room like she belonged there, because she did, and some did not like it. Some said she had changed. Some whispered that she was arrogant. Some pulled away. no longer knowing how to exist in her presence now that she refused to shrink. But she did not shrink again, because she knew now her power was not a mistake. It was not a thing to be tamed or hidden or apologized for. It was a gift, a birthright, a calling. And when she claimed it fully, without hesitation, without apology, the game changed. For years, she sought permission to be herself. She waited for someone to tell her she was good enough, strong enough, worthy enough. She thought if she could be everything they wanted, if she could fit into their mold, then maybe, just maybe, she would finally feel like she belonged. So she became what they needed. She played the roles they assigned to her. The quiet one, the agreeable one, the one who never made waves. She measured her worth by the nods of approval, by the acceptance of those who barely even saw her. And when she felt unseen, unheard, unappreciated, she blamed herself. She thought, if only I tried harder, if only I was better, if only I could make them see my heart. But no matter how much she gave, it was never enough. No matter how much she molded herself to their liking, they still found reasons to want more. She exhausted herself chasing after validation that was always just out of reach. And then one day, she stopped running. She asked herself a question she had been too afraid to face before. What if I didn't need their approval? The thought was terrifying. It felt unnatural, like stepping into a world she had never known. But as she sat with it, something inside her began to shift. She realized how much of her life had been dictated by the fear of what others might think. How many dreams she had put on hold because they weren't practical, weren't expected, weren't approved. How many times she had silenced herself just to avoid disapproval. And suddenly she was done. She was done seeking permission to exist as she was. She was done waiting for applause before she took a step forward. She was done basing her self-worth on the opinions of people who never truly understood her. Oh, they noticed. They noticed when she no longer bent to their expectations. They noticed when she spoke her truth without hesitation. They noticed when she carried herself with a quiet certainty that needed no validation. Some resented her for it. Some tried to remind her of who she used to be, accommodating, people-pleasing, afraid. But she was not that woman anymore. She had learned that approval was not the same as love, and validation was not the same as value. And when she let go of the need for permission, when she stood fully in her truth, the game changed. For too long, she lived a story that was not her own, a story written by expectation, by tradition, by the voices of others telling her who she should be. She followed the script she was given, the one that said be quiet, be nice, be grateful for whatever you get, the one that told her to play it safe, to color inside the lines, to never reach too far. She believed it for a while. She thought maybe this was just how life was meant to be. A cycle of doing what was expected, of fitting into spaces that felt too small, of ignoring the whisper inside her that said, this is not all there is. But the whisper grew louder. It spoke to her in the quiet moments, in the in-between spaces, in the deep places of her soul. It asked, whose life are you living? Whose dreams are you chasing? Whose story are you telling? And she had no answer, because the life she was living was not truly hers. It was a patchwork of other people's desires, stitched together with duty and fear. So she did the bravest thing she had ever done. She picked up the pen and started writing a new story. She wrote of a woman who was no longer afraid to take up space. A woman who did not wait for permission to follow her own path. A woman who chased dreams so big they made others uncomfortable. She let go of the old narratives, the ones that told her she was too much or not enough. She released the fear that had kept her bound to a life that did not reflect who she was meant to be. Oh, they noticed. They noticed when she stopped following their rules. They noticed when she refused to be confined by their expectations. They noticed when she lived boldly, unapologetically, without looking back. Some called her reckless, some called her selfish, some warned her that the unknown was dangerous, but she knew the real danger was staying in a life that did not belong to her. So she stepped forward, writing each chapter with courage, with intention, with fire in her spirit. She no longer waited for someone else to shape her destiny. She no longer let fear hold the pen. And when she claimed her story, when she took control of the narrative, the game changed.